Four Corners. Later, Media Watch and Greta Thunberg, A Year to Change the World.
Hello and welcome to the drama. I'm Ellen Fanning. Coming up, citizens threatened with jail. The government comes under fire for banning Australians in COVID-ravaged India from coming home. Vaccine hubs are open. Over 50s are now being called up, but will they join the queue for an AstraZeneca jab? And why are women poorer than men? The pay gaps, extra expenses and unpaid hours of work that add up to a lifetime of disadvantage. Joining me on the panel tonight, India Link Media Group CEO Pawan Luthra. Good to see you again.
Hello.
In Melbourne tonight, disability advocate Nicole Lee. Hi Nicole, long time no see.
Yeah, it is. Hi.
I'm pleased to meet tonight Senior Fellow for Social and Economic Equity at the London School of Economics, Amanda Young. Hello Amanda.
Hi. Hi Ellen.
And another Amanda, keep that in mind, I'll use full names this evening, in Adelaide, former Liberal Minister Amanda Vanstone. Hello. G'day, Ella. And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag The Drum, and we're on Facebook. If you are over 50, from today you're entitled to get the COVID vaccine. After a slow start, the government is making the vaccine available at most respiratory clinics and vaccine hubs, as well as some GP clinics. But you'll only be offered the AstraZeneca version. Despite concerns over blood clotting, the TGA says the drug is safe for over 50s. For anyone younger or those holding out, you'll likely be waiting till the end of the year when 40 million doses of Pfizer are due. The Chief Medical Officer is encouraging people not to wait.
Vaccines will be available later on in the year. We have the Novavax hopefully coming as well, so there'll be a range of possibilities later in the year. The fact is, at the moment, if you're over 50, the only vaccine that you'll be offered is AstraZeneca.
Amanda Vanstone, let's start with you. What do you sense is the mood about getting the jab in the over 50s cohort? Is there a momentum building or still some hesitancy?
Look, some people mention what they think is a risk, but usually they mention it by saying it's a much lower risk than someone under 50, for example, on the contraceptive pill. So they mention it in a sense of saying the risk isn't as high as we're led to believe it is. When we see a front page headline, 2 people have died after AstraZeneca, one of whom may have died anyway, and that one who did die, well, what is the percentage of that? We seem to have the small percentage blown out of proportion. So I think most people are very keen. My friends are swapping information about who to ring, which clinic to go to get in early, and they want the jab, they want to be protected. They think we've done well as a nation, the governments have done well. We've done well doing what we're told, which of course doesn't happen in some places, as you've seen on the media. And they don't want to throw it away, so they're happy to have the jab.
Amanda Young, you're rolling up your sleeve tomorrow.
I am indeed. I really am quite keen to get it, so I don't have any hesitancy at all. If anything, you can't get it in my arm quickly enough, frankly. But, I come from a Pacific Island background, and just about everybody I know who's Indigenous or from one of our more diverse backgrounds has got no qualms about it. I don't know if I think that I can take bullets, but I certainly feel as though there's absolutely no challenge with me taking and trusting the AstraZeneca for now. I certainly would prefer to have it now rather than later. And I guess that, if I had a Pfizer choice today, of course I'd choose Pfizer, but I'm quite comfortable with the choice.
Nicole, it's interesting that this has now been opened up from today to the over 50s. I think the GP clinics will have increasing availability for over 50s from, I think, May 17. And this, we are now down to phase 2A. So 1A and 1B were frontline and quarantine workers, frontline staff in hospitals, emergency, that sort of thing. And 1B was supposed to be healthcare workers, elderly people, people with an underlying medical condition or significant disability. And what do you think of the idea that, reflect on me, I mean, not a lot of people with a disability have received it, and people over 70 and 80 are still waiting?
Well, also, when it comes to people with disability, it's what category. Like, I'm a person with a disability, but I'm not in either of those early categories for having, the vaccination. And so it's more complex than just purely all people with disabilities. And I think it's really important that we're vaccinating people over 55. There's more health complications with, catching the flu and catching COVID. And I think there's people that sit outside of those, medical parameters around, who's got an autoimmune disorder or who's more at risk, that are actually at risk, that have potential to fall through the gaps in this rolling out of the vaccine. And, when it comes to the disability community, I think for myself, I have the luxury and privilege of being able to isolate and still remain in my home on my own with my small family. Yet, we look at people who are living in congregate settings and the need to vaccinate them, above, a lot of people after what we saw happening in nursing homes. For me, that's really not happening enough, and that's not rolling out fast enough. And yes, we need to be on to their 55s, but what do we mean when we say disabled people? Because not all of us are in that category 1A and 1B. And, why aren't we really, really pushing, vaccinating people as quickly as we can who live in group homes, that have a disability?
Pawan, does it sound like we are getting to the point, if there is some hesitancy, and we'll know in the next week or two, whether you just open it up more broadly and say, well, if you're under 50 and you're comfortable, with that very unlikely risk that you'll get a blood clot, if you have a disability and you're under 50 and you would like that risk, if you're living without a disability or some family background and you're happy to accept that risk, come on in.
Yeah, it's a matter of giving people informed choices and informing them around that decision, around what that risk is for them, and allowing them to make that choice and making it open to them as well.
Pawan?
Ellen, I also think that we have become victims of our own success. We have very low or no community transmissions. Our borders are closed. We are boasting of the number of people attending NRL or AFL games, and there's no mass devastation of any kind. People think that they're bulletproof against this virus. Now, one has to only look at India. 3 months ago, the Prime Minister was boasting that we have this virus beat, there's not an issue at all, and look how the virus has hit back. At the moment in India, there is no supply of the vaccine. And even if there was any supply, people are scared to go out. So I believe the messaging from the government and the health officials has to be of a little bit more urgency on this. Let's put some facts on the table. Just on numbers, I understand that 4 to 6 people per million get blood clots from the AstraZeneca vaccine, and not all are fatal. And if I look at the pure numbers, so that's 5 people per million. That is 0.005% of somebody getting a blood clot, and that may also not turn out to be fatal. But if I look at the death rate for those infected by the virus, even if I look at Australia, there have been about 30,000 infections, 910 Australians have died, which is about 3% of those infected. The numbers speak for themselves, so it makes logical sense. Grab any kind of vaccine which you can get. The probability of the risk ratios are extremely low, whereas if you get infected, the risk is extremely high. And that kind of an urgent message needs to get out from the health officials, from the government to the community. Get the vaccine.
Amanda Vanstone, just finally and quickly on this. We've watched the New South Wales Premier go from saying, come on, this is urgent, we really need to get this to go, to sort of not pushing people and saying, well, I understand there's some hesitancy, go and ask your doctor. How do you assess, you've got a good political antenna, how do you assess the messaging? Have they got it right?
Well, look, I think if you want to get someone to do something who's apprehensive, generally the best way is not to say, you must do this. Look, it's playing with words, I know, but look, to say you've got agency in this, you decide if you want it, might encourage actually more apprehensive people to do it. And more, you know what I mean by narky people who are just fed up with being told what to do. What works with them probably is saying, well, look, you think about it, ask your doctor, because we know from the figures that we've just been told, we know if you ask your doctor,
that's what
your doctor's
hear.
going to say, have it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So it's a good thing. Go along, ask your doctor. Whoop, out it'll come, and jab in your arm, it'll go.
Yeah, won't it be interesting to see the numbers over the next couple of weeks, the take-up. Well, our conversations this year have been dominated by the issue of women's empowerment and security. Whether it's our ability to walk safely through a park at night or work in the offices of Parliament House without being raped, the right to earn the same as one's male counterpart or to a roof over your head. We know that one of the biggest barriers to female participation in the workforce is the cost of childcare. Yesterday, the government announced a $1.7 billion package to reduce this burden, increasing subsidies for families with more than one child in care and scrapping the cap for higher income earners.
The Morrison government is already investing more than $10 billion a year into childcare. This is an additional investment. It's designed to give families choice and to make our economy stronger and to make childcare more affordable.
But there is a catch. The new funding regime won't be operational until July 2022, which means childcare funding is likely to be a key battleground in the next federal election. Gee, Nicole, how long have we been talking about this issue? You know, I probably should know the stats off by heart. The classic issue, in short, is that if a woman goes back to work, and let's just say it's a woman who tends to be the carer for the child, not that men aren't, the way childcare subsidies work is that they essentially run out, and if you work day 4 and day 5, you won't bring very much money home because you'll just hemorrhage it all in childcare costs. So finally, it looks like there might be a bit of interest in this issue. What do you think of this proposal by the government?
Oh, it's about time, for one. And no family or woman should be having to contemplate what does her career look like versus, you know, as you said, you know, what is the expense of childcare versus what is, you know, the amount that they're going to bring in, and weighing up whether or not they're going to make enough to cover that gap, or if they're even going to be at a deficit. I mean, these are really, really hard choices for families, and some families are in financial positions where, you know, the other person does have to go back to work, but also even in pursuit of their own career, to build their, you know, superannuation that sits behind them. You know, it's well and truly high time that, you know, the issues around childcare were looked into, because it's not okay that you have to constantly be balancing, you know, those financial, you know, risks around, you know, wanting to go back to your career or engage in the workforce, and to put your child into a nurturing, safe environment such as childcare, where they are going to be interacting with other children as well. I mean, it's overdue, in my opinion, in this day and age.
Amanda Young, it's interesting because it's actually a productivity question, right? If you provide affordable childcare, women will be more productive, and you'll generate, you know, more economic benefit for the entire country. And we have a productivity issue in this country. But we know that $1.7 billion, which is a lot of money, isn't anywhere near what would need to be spent to get the sort of productivity dividend that would run in excess of $10 billion if you actually solve the problem.
Yeah, that's so. Look, it is welcome. A start is always welcome. A late start is also welcome. But anything that increases the choice for women to be able to participate in the economy grows our economy. It makes eminent sense, no matter what gender you are, that we need to do that, particularly after COVID. And we also know that the COVID effects were that women disproportionately had to carry the burden of care and need to have stimulus and injection back into the workforce. And there's another piece that's playing out as well, and it's an important one, that women are largely, there's been an explosion, a doubling of single-parent families in Australia over the last 15 years, and actually since 1970s. And women comprise 84% of that. And so the choices are fairly stark for women about what are you to do to be able to bring in, be a breadwinner and also care for your children. So I think that this step will increase productivity. We know there's been ample studies around the world that show that when you support women economically and they flourish economically, all of society benefits from it.
Amanda, you know, people are throwing a political lens over this. They say the government is trying to make up ground on women's issues with this big policy announcement in the budget. Is that an element of what's going on here?
Look, I think it's a recognition.
Which Amanda? I knew I'd do that. Amanda Vanstone.
I just think it's a recognition of the need to get more women into the workforce, as you know, previous guests have said. But look, I come at this from a different angle. Within the context of the system we have, it's a good move and welcome. I just rather we didn't have that system, because the current childcare system we have is of little use to nurses who have, for example, if you work 3 days a week, you might have to book the days in childcare. If your plans change, you swap shifts with someone, you still have to pay for the day that you booked. On the weekend, you can't get it. Night hours, people who work night shifts, factory workers, people working in hospitality. You know, this industry is set up for 9 to 5. And I personally think we'd be much better if we had some form of paying the money directly to the mothers and fathers, to the families, and let them decide whether they send their kid to a childcare centre, whether they pay the neighbour next door. Now, I know people go, oh no, you have to have, you know, quality childcare. But they don't say, oh no, you have to have quality childcare just for 9 to 5 people. So my issue is, I think we should try and make childcare much more accessible and affordable for the people who need it, who are largely shift workers who work at all odd hours, and normal daycare does not do that. So pay the money straight to the family. You know what will happen? Yeah. These childcare centres, they'll just whack up the prices.
Do you think? And would you limit it? I mean, often there's a call that immediately follows this of what about stay-at-home mums? Should they deserve some sort of payment? Would you link it to the world of work, Amanda Vanstone? Would you say this is a cost to the budget because it's about economic participation, it's about productivity, and it's essentially, I don't know, like dry cleaning or paper clips, it's a cost of going to work, and therefore it's paid to women and men who work and need childcare?
Yes, I would. I think it should have been tax deductible. It was never made deductible because too many people said, oh, you can't do that, that'll be the rich, or they'll get, you know, PhD students to look after their children to try and make the kids smart. It was a bunch of old men in Parliament not recognising that we were shifting to 2-income families. A lot of families now have to have 2 incomes in order to survive, and we should have set up a system that would allow us to pay the money directly to those families and let them choose how their kids were looked after. Then we wouldn't have this enormous industry that we keep pouring money into when that money should be going to the families.
Amanda Young, you're nodding away there.
I am. I couldn't be in more agreement with Amanda Vanstone, which is news for me. But I also, look, I agree wholeheartedly with the sentiments. We have too much precarity in our work balance at the moment, and the shift workers and the carers and the people who really do need to have a choice in how they participate in the economy. But also, I often think of this in the lens of a family unit as well. And I consider this an investment, just as we would do in roads and hospitals, into humans, into women and families who are bringing up the next generation, our future as well. And that I agree with Amanda Vanstone that we aren't putting that lens across it, and we're not treating it as though it's a really important investment for our future. It seems to be still caught in some, you know, philosophical and political arguments around it when the world is moving on, and rapidly. We've just seen Joe Biden introduce childcare for the first time in the United States. The world is moving towards understanding that these things must happen, and we need to support families so they can achieve, they can thrive, they can create prosperity for our country, but also to have prosperity in the lens of how they see prosperity, and that they can be healthy contributors to not only society, to also to their own well-being.
I'll come to you, Minister Pawan, but Nicole, you've got some thoughts there?
I don't agree with it sitting purely around those who are engaging with the workforce. I mean, as a young mother myself, I had to return to education, you know, later in life after having my children. If I could have done that, whilst my children were younger, I'd be a lot further ahead than what I am now. But there's, you know, all sorts of other ways in which people contribute to their community and things that they do that sit outside of that workforce, in the volunteer space, in the activist space, in the advocacy space, and volunteering within our community in general, and with that arts and creative space, which isn't necessarily a traditional job, and why aren't we providing the resources, for creative mothers and activists and people wanting to pursue education to be able to do that, with children, or mothers with single mothers with large families that just need that help as well. I think it's very, I agree with most of the points except that position around on that, around people who are within the workforce.
It's interesting, Pawan, that we're having this discussion in a year in which gender issues have been so significant for the government. Brittany Higgins coming forward, and it seemed everybody knew what had happened, but nobody had told the Prime Minister the reports of terrible behaviour by staffers at Parliament House, stories of bullying and all the rest of it. And the Prime Minister working very hard to keep up with this issue. A lot of critique around this. Do you think in some ways this issue, which like a lot of issues we've been talking about for years, needing to do something about, is being dealt with now because of that?
Absolutely. Politically, it makes a lot of sense. I know what Amanda Vanstone just said. But the government is a bit on the nose with the women, and this can only but help gain traction with that particular block of voters. So anything which increases workplace participation for women is a great idea. There has been a study done by KPMG in which they've calculated that if the subsidy increases from 85 to 95%, that will boost the economy by $7.4 billion. The cost is $5.4 billion, so the net gain is $2 billion. So I think that's an excellent idea. Then it also narrows the gap with the Labour side of politics, as you mentioned in your introduction. And currently, the government has pivoted away from the Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey narrative of 2014 about budget repair to the new narrative of whatever it takes to grow the economy. So if the government's got the money and the ability to spend the money on childcare, I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, obviously, one of the benefits of cheaper childcare is the opportunity to narrow the gap in lifetime earnings between men and women. And as Nicole said, the subsequent size of that precarious pot of money we call superannuation. In this regard, the numbers are sobering. Women have nearly half the superannuation of men when they retire, on average $90,000 less. It doesn't help that the gender pay gap persists nationally, currently sitting at 13.4%. UK journalist and editor Annabelle Williams has been exploring these inequalities and how they impact women everywhere. Her book, Why Women Are Poorer Than Men and What We Can Do About It, reveals the discriminatory policies and attitudes in Britain, many of which were exported to Australia.
In England, until 1950, the definition of somebody too incapacitated to deal with money was any infant, married woman, lunatic, idiot, or insane person. It's really important to look at British laws because these were exported around the world. The conversation around women and money has got stuck on this issue of women need to negotiate their pay. Women need to go into science subjects. That's not really what it's about. It's about our system that doesn't allow women to save money for retirement. One of the biggest problems for women is old age poverty. Australia actually has one of the widest pension gaps. The typical Australian woman reaches retirement age with 50% less money saved than the typical man. And women live for longer than men. So to have a system where women aren't able to save as much money for retirement in the knowledge that we're going to live for longer, that doesn't make any sense. This is a global problem. So when we talk about the pay gap, it's always, women just want to earn more money. It doesn't just benefit women. It's like families do better. It's much easier on men if they don't have this crushing pressure to be the breadwinner. Countries in Eastern Europe have pay gaps in favour of women in really male areas such as waste management, construction and sewers. This is a throwback to the socialist era when the governments wanted to prove that their model worked. And actually in places like Hungary and Romania, women can earn up to 20% more than men in these jobs. So it's really cultural ideas about what's appropriate for each gender to be doing that's part of why women are poorer than men. Generations and communities do better when wealth is shared more equally within a society. So this isn't just a women's issue, it's something that benefits everybody.
Let me take you first, Amanda Young. You used to work with the First Nations Foundation, which is Australia's only charity working towards achieving financial literacy. Society, Amanda, conspires to limit women's wealth. Is it a conspiracy, Amanda Young?
Or I'm going to have to come down the part on the side of there are definitely very strong structural limits to women being able to create wealth and to get out of what is a constant trap around the challenge between income and wealth. And I really do want to pick up the question of from that previous work I was doing, which was going around Indigenous communities around Australia with a foundation and taking superannuation people with us to learn how much awareness there was of a product like superannuation, and financial literacy was incredibly low, that it's important that people can access and understand how the economy shapes their lives and how they can participate in it. And so over, I guess, a number of years, I saw exactly what you've just described, Ellen, the limits on women being able to achieve wealth. In Australia, of course, superannuation is the main game. That it is, you know, we have the 4th largest sovereign fund in the world, behind the US and UK and I think Norway. So $4 trillion, and Australia's a net exporter of capital. That means that we invest more overseas than comes back into Australia with our superannuation and our wealth. So where do women figure in that? And if you really look at it, there's hardly any of the CEOs in superannuation are women. I think Debbie Blakely might be one of the few examples of that at the top end. So if you want to talk about structure and how whether or not there's a conspiracy, I don't know if people are plotting in dark corners to stop women from participating in their superannuation, but I do feel as though there's this benign neglect. And even if I took it wider than just women for a short period and said Australia has never done a financial literacy effort around superannuation, we've pretty much had to wing it as we've been moving through the superannuation system. And we're at a point now where there are people trying to understand how to self-manage this super or what life will look like in retirement. But at the same time, we've got the largest growing cohort of homeless people are women aged over 55 who couldn't access the superannuation system previously and didn't have sufficient savings. And so it creates this imbalance that keeps on playing out again and again and again. So even though if it's not a deliberate design, it's a pretty poor design, and we really need to do something about it.
Nicole Lee, the book talks about what the author calls some of the myths about women, right? That women are risk averse and women have no aptitude for business. Women do not make good entrepreneurs, Nicole. And I thought I'd put that to you because you're one of the bravest people I know talking about risk. I mean, you've escaped horrific domestic violence. You've been a powerful advocate. You've stood for Parliament, as Amanda Vanstone has, which takes an awful lot of gumption, I'd say, for anybody. Women don't like risk.
I think that's an absolutely ridiculous notion that women don't like risk or we don't understand risk. We know risk every day. We know risk when we walk at night. We know risk when we go into relationships, and we have to, you know, for me, that was a risk I had to take, was giving up, you know, my disability support pension that has supported me my whole life and raised my children to be in a relationship. To think that we don't know our risks, you know, when we think of leaving a relationship, we're constantly evaluating, calculating our risks. So, yeah, that's a really narrow-minded and unintellectual assessment of women and their understanding of risk. And I'd like to know, you know, what's their concept and framework that they have positioned this understanding of risk in their book, to be honest with you.
No, well, she's quoting people. She says when she started as a financial journalist, there was a common phrase, women don't like risk, and our author writes, none of the people she interviewed was able to explain why this might be the case. Talk to me, Nicole, about traps, if you like, poverty traps. You were a mother, are a mother, and you didn't put a dime into superannuation until you were 40. I mean, in a sense, is that, not that motherhood isn't wonderful, but is that a poverty trap?
Well, yeah, it is a poverty trap. You know, there is no element around, you know, part of your pension goes into superannuation, and there was no money left over at the end of the week, you know, to put into superannuation. I had no means available to me to accumulate any super, and now, you know, in the position I'm in now, I am very risk averse around finances, and because I know what it was like to have nothing. So now, when I do get money, and I was very, very lucky. Eventually, I was able to access, you know, JobKeeper last year for a brief period of time. I have not spent that money. I have it there behind me, waiting for something to blow up, waiting for an emergency. So if you've been subjected to, you know, poverty, living week to week, having to, you know, I had to steal nappies and wet ones and things to get by. When you've lived like that, when you've lived sitting there in a supermarket, spending hours working out 100 grams on this item versus 100 grams on that item, which is cheaper, you know, yeah, you do become risk averse because you're so afraid of when is that thing behind you going to disappear. And that is a product of poverty. That is a product of, you know, living with violence and wondering, you know, what resources you have available and when is the government going to pull these things away if you all of a sudden get a handout. You know, yeah, we are risk averse, and they're for very, very genuine reasons. And, you know, maybe if there was some element factored into for people on, you know, pensions and mothers who are not engaging with the workforce, who are raising their children, you know, what kind of basic income could we possibly providing them, and even some small amount that we could be, you know, putting away for women who are choosing to engage in motherhood and raising of the children and looking after the home, so they're not left destitute, they're not left faced with homelessness if that relationship breaks down. You know, that's that universal basic income, and we don't do those things and then wonder why these women come out of those relationships very, very risk averse when it comes to finances.
Amanda Vanstone, as a Liberal, do you accept the extent, that idea of the structural nature of the problem from when girls are young, the sort of subjects they're encouraged to study, the sort of professions they're encouraged to go into, the sort of structural issues around domestic violence and the rest of it, time out of the workforce, that means that in every nation in the world, collectively, women don't earn as much as men for their labour?
Yeah, look, I think that's right. Women are encouraged sometimes in the background rather than covertly encouraged into a range of professions that don't necessarily pay that well. But when they get out of that, they don't do too badly. Look, I don't have the names at my fingertips, but some of the most successful people in biomedical technology in Australia are women. They've jumped out of the hold and they're not going back. And I'm sure there would be examples in other fields as well. The changes that are coming or have come take a long time, however, to filter through. It's not to say that where we are now is acceptable, and certainly where we were 20 years ago wasn't, but that it just takes time for kids at school to decide, yes, I'm going to do nano-engineering, which is apparently old hat now. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then move out and be an entrepreneur. It'll be another few decades before all of those kids have come through school and lived a different life than I have, and a different one that you have. It just takes time. But look, it's the attitude of the community at large and of men, I think, that is not helpful. And have we got time for me to share a quick story with you?
Why not?
Okay, well, when I was a new senator, I'd only been in a couple of years, but somewhere between 85 and 88 when we moved to the new Parliament House. So in those 3 years in the old Parliament House, in opposition, I discovered that the then Labor government had 2 bills before the Parliament which were inconsistent. Now, you can't have that. You can't pass two laws that are inconsistent with each other. It's crazy. And it shouldn't ever happen. The process should pick that up before they get published. So I went to people to explain this, and I was, oh yes, okay, well, have you checked this? Have you checked that? As if to say, you couldn't possibly be coming to me, you silly little girl, with a bombshell to show the government is incompetent. You must have, misassessed something. So I was getting nowhere. And finally someone came in and said, oh, she's right. This is about a week later. And we had a big motion of no confidence in the government, at which The Leader of the Opposition in the Senate, the Deputy Leader and the Electoral Office spokesperson spoke. I think I got the last 2 minutes. Now, what difference would that have made in my career if the front page stories were, new young senator discovers, great problem, government brought to its knees? Just didn't happen. It was never going to happen. Why? Because the boys didn't see it and the boys didn't want the credit to go anywhere else. So that's just how they were.
Are you confident it would be different today in Canberra?
Not entirely, no. Not entirely, no. No.
Pawan, your thoughts on this?
Look, I just want to add my experience on this topic. My 23-year-old daughter, about 3 years ago, got her very first job. And I thought I'll have a financial chat with her.
Right.
And she was happy enough to draw on my experience. And I said, look, there could be times when you may not be working because of family and other requirements, though obviously things could change in the future. And you're also a part of the sandwich generation that you'll take care of not only your young ones, but there could be elderly parents whom you may have to take care of. So I think we should start working through your finances now. Now she was getting her first full-time paycheck. This was money she had never seen before, because otherwise it was normally, weekend work or a few dollars here or there. But now there was a regular paycheck coming in for her. So I asked her to do a budget and said, you do your budget, how much money you need. And obviously she was starting off from a low level because she'd never spent the money. So that became her budget. And I said, let's keep this money in a everyday spending account. So that's your money. But let's put some money away in another silo for the long term. And we got her at that age to start salary sacrificing $50 a week into superannuation. Now, remember, she had never seen this money, so she, not having the $50 did not affect her.
Yeah.
And she got a tax deduction also because it was salary sacrifice. And she's continually doing that. And then there was a middle silo where the rest of the money is accumulating. And one of the tricks, Ellen, which we did was we took the money out to spend first and save the rest, rather than spending everything and whatever's left over is what goes into the saving account. So we retrofitted the expenditure. You need $500 a week or $300 or whatever she needed. Yeah. That's what we will do. And what we do is on the 1st of September and the 1st of March every year, we sit down and review her superannuation fund. We log into her account, we go through that, and I try to teach her. So I think education is a big key. And I've done something similar for my friends' children. And I'm surprised. This generation is very much connected. Yeah. They're listening to podcasts. They're trying to read up. They want to ask the questions. So there is a group of people who is very interested, especially young women, in learning more about finances.
We do need to move on, but just let me come back to you, Amanda Young, because you've worked as a criminal lawyer in the past. You've seen the impacts of people trying to grow up in poverty, and you describe it. I mean, that's a wonderful middle-class story from Pawan, right? About the funnel that can drag you down from poverty. Not to say you don't have agency in the world, but there is this funnel with this kind of gravity, right? Just briefly.
So, yeah, that's how I conceptualise of this. Money, well, the position is how big your funnel is when you start is often the product of what your parents and your grandparents did before you. So first of all, there's life's lottery as to how big or small your funnel is, and that's around about how many resources you have at your disposal. How much, income can you choose to spend as a discretionary amount or put away towards your superannuation? And so I come from a background where my family were brought over from the Pacific Islands as slaves 4 generations ago, and gradually through to me, I have had the funnel widen a little bit because I'm still the only person in my family who has matriculated school and done a degree and studied law. And yet I used to see with all of my clients at court, and indeed, through 20 years in the Indigenous space as well, seeing people who don't have the benefit of a father who can sit down and say, as I didn't either, this is how you spend money. This is how the system works. I've often thought of it almost as a game of playing snakes and ladders where you've got no ladder if you've got no financial literacy. So you're just making bad decision after bad decision. And so your funnel gets narrower and narrower over a period of time until you end up in the hands of the predators, the payday lenders, in the hands of people who are making profit from your poverty, and that this system's being held up as fine in a capitalist system, and I don't know that I agree with that. I certainly have seen the impact of people with diminishing choices trying to survive until they get crunched. And so over a period of time, if we can shift that mindset and put the family at the centre and design economies that can work for that, that's a far greater model than this, you know, tweak a bit here, superannuation, tweak every year, another little lens of it, and get a model that's working for the country and working for families in this country, no matter if they want to work in arts or if they want to work in run a business. Women are fantastic entrepreneurs. I just want to say that out loud. They're amazing.
And before we conclude this segment, I must say you're on record lots of times as saying you're going to leave all your money when you die, however much it is, to all the females in your family. What a I bet they're all cheering, watching you tonight and wishing you well, financially and in every other way. Yes. You are watching The Drum, and with me on the panel, India Link Media Group CEO Pawan Luthra, in Melbourne disability advocate Nicole Lee, Senior Fellow for Social and Economic Equity at the London School of Economics, Amanda Young, and former Liberal Minister Amanda Vanstone joins us from Adelaide. The catastrophe unfolding in India shows no signs of easing, with the nation recording its highest daily death toll since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. But in response to that, the government has effectively run to shut the gates to Australians trying to escape the crisis for home. In fact, late Friday night, it confirmed people trying to circumvent the ban by travelling via third countries would face severe fines and even prison.
Our decisions, just as they were with the 1st of February 2020 ban on flights from China, which was roundly criticised at the time and which has turned out to have been one of the most important post-war decisions in terms of Australia's health and safety, those decisions are made to protect Australians, to protect against a third wave, to protect against a massive risk to Australia, and made with a heavy heart but without hesitation.
In response to criticism of the move, the government said it was following the advice of the Chief Medical Officer. In a letter to the Health Minister, Professor Paul Kelly reportedly conceded that some Australians could die as a result of the ban, but urged the suspension of arrivals because of the growing number of cases in hotel quarantine.
We were asked to look at what were the highest risk countries in the world in terms of people coming into our hotel quarantine system and into Howard Springs, the Howard Springs facility in particular. And that was absolutely and clearly from India, people arriving from India. So that was the advice that was given. In terms of the fines and so forth, that is just that they're in the Biosecurity Act as offences under the Act. So there was no advice given in relation to fines or jail terms.
More than 9,000 Australians in India are registered as wanting to return home, including 615 considered vulnerable. Vishal Dandra travelled to India to visit his father on his deathbed 3 weeks ago. He was booked to fly home to his wife and son late last week.
My dad, he knew that I'll be coming on 11th, so he wouldn't let go. He was just breathing, nothing else, but he kept on breathing until I got here, until I saw him, until I just said final goodbye and did our final rituals. And after a few hours, he started to give up and he was gone on the same day. One part of me that was thinking, this is good that I made it here. I saw him one last time, and being an elder son, I was able to complete all his rituals. Maybe that's what he wanted. That's why he wanted me to come. I applied for a genuine permission. I provided all the documents you required 2 times, and then you allowed me to come, and now you're saying that you can't come back. On top of that, they're treating me as a criminal to come back to the country where I belong. All my life is there now. I moved to Australia in 2006, which is effectively 15 years now. So all my young life, I worked there, I reached my goal, and now I devoted all my life to Australia. When I first got my passport, I felt overwhelmed because holding an Australian passport is a privilege. Even now, I'm privileged to have it, but our Prime Minister and this particular government, they will come and go. They're not going to stay here forever, but this whole thing will remain with Australia, that Australia once applied these rules to one particular country. And I traveled here when I absolutely had to, not to make money. It cost me at least 10,000 so far just to come here and go back. Because at the moment they said the flight ban is up until 15, but who knows what they're going to say on 15. They may extend it for another 15 days, a month. I can't just keep staying here as it is because my family back home, they're struggling and my money is running out. I may lose my job as well because they're not going to wait for me forever.
Pawan, what a story.
It is sad, isn't it?
You've got a story too. You were in the supermarket on Friday night.
Saturday morning I was in the supermarket and there's a guy who stacks the shelves and we often say hello to each other, and I just went to him and asked him, how's he going? And he looked at me and said, I lost my father yesterday. I would say he was numb. He was doing what he could, stacking the shelves, but he had just lost his father. And this is how this virus is spreading in India. The circles of people I know who are getting affected is getting smaller and smaller. When I was here a week ago, there were people I knew who knew people who got affected. Now there are friends who I know who have passed away, some within a matter of 72 hours. And I get the feedback from family and friends. It's not a matter of if we get the virus, but when we get the virus. So it's almost like a feeling that it is going to hit us. And whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're living in a big house or a small house, it is going to come and affect you. And the currency at the moment, Ellen, in India is oxygen cylinders or oxygen concentrators, because this virus affects your lungs and you need oxygen. And there is no oxygen available in any place for love or money. If you have strings, you pull them. I know some people who are extremely well off and they are on Facebook begging anybody to help them source oxygen for their parents, for their young ones. So it's really difficult when I hear these stories, when I look at the pictures, when I get the social media messages of people suffering because of a health system which is totally broken down.
News has broken late this afternoon, this evening, that the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, and this is a story in The Guardian and on the ABC News site, Paul Kelly conceded that Australians could die overseas, and we know there's 9,000 people in India, Australians waiting to come home. He considered that Australians could die when he asked Greg Hunt to implement that ban on travel from India. And in the letter, according to these reports, Professor Kelly asked for it to become an offence under the Biosecurity Act for anyone who'd been in India in the last 14 days to come back to Australia, acknowledging that this would set a precedent. Your views on that?
Look, there are different layers to unpeel over here. One is on the overall morality issue on this whole discussion of whether Australians should be allowed to come back to their own country. Now,
and we should point out that Vishal in the story, and I imagine you as well, in order to become an Australian citizen, is this correct? You've got to give up your Indian citizenship. So he doesn't have any rights as a citizen?
No, we have no rights as Indian citizens.
Over
There's no dual citizenship. You're, when you take your citizenship pledge, when you're granted Australian citizenship, we have to surrender our Indian passport. So we are Australian. And so when I took the pledge, I have printed out what I had to say. From this time forward, under God, I pledge my loyalty to Australia and its people, whose democratic beliefs I share, whose rights and liberties I respect, and whose laws I will uphold and obey. This is my side of the bargain of becoming an Australian citizen. And then the Australian government gives me a citizenship certificate, which allows me to get a passport. And they make a promise to me, and the promise is quite clearly written in the Australian passport, which says the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia requests all those whom it may concern to allow the bearer, an Australian citizen, to pass freely without let or hindrance, and to afford him or her every assistance and protection of which he or she may stand in need. Protection is what Australian citizens who are stranded in India need now. There's a health system which is crumbling. There's surrounded by virus. We need to find a way to bring them back.
So your thoughts on the fact that the Chief Medical Officer reportedly said that he wanted the ban, he wanted it backed up by jail time, even though Australians of Indian heritage could die?
Well, I can see where the CMO is coming from, but then I need to go back to the political area where we need to look at it very closely, because this is about having strong border protection. We only have to look at the recent election results in Queensland and Tasmania and Western Australia, where governments get rewarded by having strong borders, and the incumbent premiers have all come back to power. And so even if we look at a Lowy Institute poll released yesterday, 65% of the 2,200 who were surveyed were praising the government for the way they're handling the pandemic. Strong border protection always wins issues. In fact, 20 years ago, there was an embattled Harvard government who made a statement which won them the election. We will decide who comes to this country and under the circumstances with which they come.
But he wasn't speaking about Australians.
I'm aware of that. But now I need to go back to the very human issue of Australians and their families who are separated. The government has said they're going to review the situation on 15th of May. I really hope in the back room somewhere there's a group of advisors who are sitting there trying to figure out what else can be done, because this virus, Ellen, is not to go away by the 15th of May. It's going to be with us for a longer time, not only in India, but there could be rolling red zones which will happen. Any Hollywood movies which we see in which in about 120 minutes, there's a pandemic, there's a solution, and then everybody is in parks having a terrific time. I don't think that's going to happen.
Let me turn to Amanda Vanstone if I can. There was a lot of commentary today that Andrew Bolt, a Conservative commentator, wrote an opinion piece today, Amanda Vanstone, saying that this decision stinks of racism. He said, I fear that the more than 600,000 Australians of Indian ancestry will now conclude they can never be real citizens of this country. They are considered outsiders, not real Australians. You were Minister for Immigration, you were an ambassador overseas. What's the value of their Australian citizenship? Is it equal to all others?
Yes, it is. There's not a ban on people of Indian heritage coming back. There's a ban on people coming from India. So you might be, I don't know,
on anyone coming from the United States at the height of their pandemic, or the UK or Europe.
That wasn't the same. As I understand it, the figures in India are tragic. Certainly the coverage that I've seen is some of the saddest, most heart-wrenching stuff that I've seen on television, to the point that I don't think the cameras should be there and film a woman, you know, just begging for help to help her brother, and then they pan away and say, oh, he died 2 minutes later. I mean, I think
briefly.
In the moment before her brother died, she's entitled to some privacy. But
certainly,
in any event,
but the point is that we haven't said to Australians returning from any of those other places.
And Ellen,
you'll be thrown in jail if you try and come back.
The United States is allowing its US citizens and their spouses to come back to the US even now.
Indian Americans. All right, let Amanda Vanstone finish on that thought. Why the fine, Amanda? Why the use of the Biosecurity Act, the threat of 5 years jail, criminalising Australians returning to Australia?
Look, I don't know. They might have some information about... let me just imagine what it could be. It could be some information about someone who on the net is saying, I can get you back, come in through this back door. So they're wanting to make it clear. Let me put the question the other way. Look, I understand this is heart-wrenching stuff. And for the gentleman who was interviewed earlier who said he had to go. No, he didn't. He wanted to go. Now, if we allow people to come in from a place...
allowed him to go. I mean, he made that point twice. Allowed him to go.
Yes, but did they know then what was going to happen in India? No one did. A month ago, people were still saying things were pretty good, as has already been said. They were boasting about how well they had it under control. And the fact that it's got out of control quickly shows how quickly it can get out of control. I think Australians would be relentlessly unforgiving of state and federal governments that allowed people to come in when they weren't sure if they could handle the virus that they might bring with them. I mean, sure, as a citizen, you've got a right to come back. Do you have a right to come back and infect others? No, you don't. So we need to develop, I agree with what Pawan said, a way of being able to ascertain who can come back safely, because we can't allow people to come in and infect other Australians, because if it spreads here as rapidly as it has in India, we'll be in big trouble.
Quick response, Pawan, and then we'll go to...
Look, I think the government needs to work on some strategy to make sure that they can bring people back. They brought people back from Wuhan when the virus struck initially, and they were all safely brought back. Something needs to be done. The 9,000 Australians cannot be abandoned in India. I hope on 15th of May, I do hear something from the government positive. This is our quarantining options. This is how we start bringing people back.
Yes, I agree
this
with
is
that.
our strategy.
Nicole Lee, you seem very exercised about this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that there needs to be a strategy of how we bring these people back, how we quarantine them safely back in this country versus just completely shutting them out. And to say that, you know, that somebody didn't have the need to have to travel to India, well, who wants to leave their father to die alone? I mean, this is humanitarian. This is where is our humanity in this argument? You know, we didn't stop people from the UK. We didn't stop people from the US. And yes, people from the UK came back and spread that. No, nobody has the right to come back and spread the virus. But we need to be looking at our hotel quarantine. And why haven't we at this point? It's been a problem, you know, along the last year. Why haven't we invested in safe options to quarantine people safely so that they're not infecting other people, so they can come home to their families? And then we bring in the issue of why are we as a nation blocking, you know, poorer nations of being able to access the patent to the vaccine, to be able to develop it for themselves, to roll it out amongst their community, which would be stopping that spread across India and reducing the amount of people that are dying. There's multiple things that we are doing as a nation which just go completely against all, you know, humanitarian and human rights elements here.
We're short on time, Amanda Young. Foreign Minister Marise Payne argues the ban is absolutely not racist, says 57% of recent hotel quarantine cases came from India. The Australian Human Rights Commission wants to know the government to prove that its attempt to is not discriminatory and wants the reasons. And then we find out tonight the CMO concedes Australians overseas, in India included, could die as a result of this ban.
So Australia, I think, has a long, proud history of discriminating when not discriminating. And, you know, to start with, my family's story, I don't know if many people realise that in 1901, with the White Australia policy, all the Pacific Islanders who'd come over to work and built this nation were sent home. This feels like another version of that. And we have seen it again and again over time. And it's reaching a point where putting that to one side, and it is a genuine issue, and I'm quite unnerved that I agreed with Andrew Bolt on anything at the moment, but putting that to one side, I think that people will be relentlessly unforgiving of a government that there's a simple solution here, and it was quarantine. And we know in our constitution, the very same constitution that the passports come from, that the government is responsible for quarantine. And they've had a year and they have not been able to successfully create anything. We wouldn't be in this position where we are doing these heartbreaking decisions to leave people to their own devices in a raging pandemic when they're from our nation. And I feel as though we have to focus squarely on how we're responding to this and how the federal government has been as well.
Last word, Pawan, we've got about 30 seconds.
Look, on a positive side, I've been hearing some good things which are happening in India. The oxygen flow which was required in wave one was about 700 metric tons a day. Currently, about 5,000 metric tons a day is required. India has the capacity to produce 6,785. So there's enough capacity, but there are border restrictions and movement restrictions. But that is starting to open up. Vaccinations are getting ramped up. India has the technology and scientific knowledge to make it all happen. And
it's
in
just
the
a matter
next 4 to 6 weeks,
it's just a matter
we will
of
start
time.
seeing the positive changes flow through.
Right. Thank you so much. I know this is very emotional for you to do this. We've run out of time to discuss the NDIS. Nicole will record an interview with you for tomorrow's show and discuss it at length. And my thanks to all of the panel tonight.